All right. So we've talked quite a bit about attributions now. So we will take that knowledge and kind of apply it to a couple outcomes that can occur based on our attributions. So we're going to be talking about both a combination of our self-efficacy attributions as well as or expectations, sorry, as well as outcome expectations. So self-efficacy expectations, this is our belief that we can do a certain behavior and that we can succeed at that, or that we can do well at whatever a task is. So like I can do well at this job, I can get the grade that I want in this class, etc. Versus outcome expectancies, this is now, okay, I have this belief that I can do the behavior, but I also have an expectancy that when I do this behavior, it's going to lead to some type of consequence or outcome. So for an example, if I do this job well, I expect to get paid. Or if I consistently get the grades that I want in my classes, I will end up in the career field that I want, getting the job that I want, things like that. One thing that our expectancies about self-efficacy and outcomes can lead to is what's called learned helplessness. And yeah, this is something that our attributions influence. And this is just a type of outcome expectancy, basically. It's most common with non-contingent failure. We've talked about non-contingent success and self-handicapping, but with non-contingent failure, it's the belief that it'd be the belief that I will fail on this task, whatever it is, no matter what behaviors I use, no matter if I study, don't study, watch the lectures, take notes, I'm going to fail this test. That would be an example of learned helplessness. And a classic study on learned helplessness is with dogs and by Seligman. It's a very important study for psychology, but I'm not a huge fan because I really like dogs, and I really doubt that this is something that we could do these days. But anyways, in this non-contingent failure condition, so let me backtrack a little bit. Basically, before the actual test trial in this study where things are measured, there were practice trials. And so in these practice trials, one scenario looks like this, where if there's a shock, the dog can jump over. And in another condition, this was blocked off actually. So if the shock occurs, there's literally nothing that the dog can do. It's kind of messed up. But then in the test trials, right, both conditions, this is open and the dog can jump over. But what we see is that those dogs in the non-contingent failure condition who were just going to get shocked and there's nothing they could do about it, when they have the chance to jump over, they don't. They just stay there. And this is an example of what's called learned helplessness, just the idea that it does not matter what I do, I'm going to get this shock or I'm going to fail, whatever that might be. And this is for humans, this is dependent on attribution style. So this will typically include an internal and stable attributions for negative outcomes. So I failed at this and it's because of my ability, and my ability isn't going to change. So I'm just going to continue to fail and there's no point. When this really becomes a problem is when we also have these global attributions, because then it's not just for one task, and then it starts kind of bleeding over into everything that we're doing. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this is a study similar to that dog study, but for humans. And so basically, there was a loud noise, and the ability to escape that loud noise in practice trials was dependent on condition. So in one condition, there was a switch where you could turn the noise on or off and you could escape. Or one condition where that switch wasn't an option, it was not escapable. And then a control condition when there was just no noise. And this is a combination of two studies, and we'll get into that. But that noise paradigm is the same for both. And then, like with the dogs, there ends up being a test trial. So in study one, that test trial is now everyone is given the option to turn that noise on or off. And we see that those who in the practice trials who were not able to do that show learned helplessness for this task. They were less likely, or it took them a lot more time to figure out that they could use this switch. However, for study two, something I forgot to mention that's more important for study two, because it didn't have a difference here in study one, but measured beforehand was whether these participants tended to have a global or task-specific attribution style. And so there is a difference here, though, when it's not just turning off and on that noise anymore. It's the measure is doing an anagram task, so how many anagrams are successfully completed. And for those who had the inescapable noise, this also, and a global attribution style, this learned helplessness bled over to the anagrams, where they were doing much worse with these anagram tasks and completing these anagram tasks relative to those who had the specific attribution style and just attributed that learned helplessness to the specific task of turning that noise on and off. And so long story short, global explanatory style leads to the broad generalization of helplessness, which becomes very problematic, and it's associated with things like depression, but in this case, that just correlated then to worse performance on anagram tests. We have talked about in this class previously how we want control over our environment, right? We have this inherent want to explore as a way of having mastery and control over the environment, so mastery and control motives. And so we can look at this kind of throughout life, and it looks a little bit different, but interestingly, this starts, even babies start to do this with behavior event contingencies. This is just basically the learning we've talked about in the past, right? With like operant conditioning, where, okay, if I behave this way, I can expect this outcome. So one example of that for babies is turning the head, and then if they turn the head, they get food or the milk reinforcement. This gets a little bit more complicated in terms of usually around that 9 or 10 month range. It's become systematic testing for intended effects. Basically, what it just means is more complicated attempts to control the environment, and children in this age are commonly called little scientists. And so basically they behave a certain way to see what happens when they behave a certain way. So I think a really common one with kids is they will, if they're sitting like a high chair or something, right, they will take something and they'll drop it and they'll see what happens. They're going to see if the parent or whatever adult is there is going to help them and pick that up and put it back. And it's like a little science experiment every time that object is dropped. And in this video, it's the child fills up a container, dumps it out, hypothetically because of the loud crash noise that occurs. It's kind of fun. And then fills it up again, does it again. So yeah, little scientists there. But then around the 2-year mark, when age gets above that point, behaviors start to have more of a purpose or a goal. So this is a science experiment technically, but there's not so much of a goal there versus here there is. So the outcome of action becomes the focus of behavior. So children begin to, do things like puzzles and games that have purposes that you can win or complete, and have overarching outcome expectancies and goals. And so this exploration and mastery control of the environment is something that influences self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, again, this is the belief that performance, that we can perform a certain way and that this will accomplish our goal and that we have the ability to do this. There are some antecedents to this, or things that bring about whatever self-efficacy perceptions we have. The first is malleability of the skill involved, basically just meaning, can we acquire the skill? Even if we don't have it right now, is it possible to get this skill? Valence of feedback. So it's really important to receive both positive and negative feedback. And it's really important that this feedback is specific. And by that, I just mean feedback more than just, oh, you succeeded at this task or you failed at this task, but also adding to that in terms of, okay, you failed at this task, here's why, or you succeeded, here's specifically what you did well. Additionally, as we get closer to the goal, we see typically increases in self-efficacy because that goal, as we get closer, just it feels more attainable, right? There are also some consequences to self-efficacy. For high self-efficacy, these consequences are typically very beneficial. So one beneficial consequence of this is setting better goals. And by better, I mean more specific goals. We'll talk about this a bit more in the next section. So more specific goals, and goals that are both possible as well as challenging. So a combination of that. We also see increased persistence and effort in those with high self-efficacy. And there's a greater, based on that persistence and effort, there's greater likelihood of success. And we'll talk about as well how self-efficacy, as well as our perceptions of control, all this combining with feelings of learned helplessness, right, influences risk of depression. So high self-efficacy typically significantly decreases risk of depression. That control that we talked about is an antecedent of self-efficacy. And so I really like this study a lot. This is a study of managers, and what's measured is belief in self-efficacy, or those self-efficacy expectations, right, over 3 time periods. And basically what this involved was one of two things: either interpreting problems as needing to acquire a new skill, but that one has the self-efficacy to acquire that skill, and then it's possible to gain new skills, or on the flip side, that one is just born to be a good manager or not, and that's just fixed, and it's just inherent. Either things are going great and I'm an awesome manager, things are going poorly and there's not much I can do to fix it. So this is just how I was born and I can't gain these abilities. What we see is that, so this solid line, I know it's a little bit hard to read, sorry about that, but this is the acquirable. So this is interpreting problems as needing to acquire a new skill versus my ability to be a manager is just inherited. And so for those who have this acquirable mindset or self-efficacy perception, we see, for those who believe that skill is acquirable, we see higher perceived self-efficacy, we see more self-set goals, more use of analytic strategies, and greater overall organizational performance. And this gets at something that I've briefly mentioned in the past, which is the growth mindset. And again, I just think that this is really important. The difference between I'm doing really badly at something and there's just nothing I can do about it. It's fixed. My intelligence, my abilities are fixed. I just inherited these, nothing I can do. Versus, sure, I didn't do well about now. I didn't do well in this task now, but I can grow. I can acquire new skills. I can get better at this task. I can try new strategies. I can put in more effort, things like that. And that just has so many benefits, this growth mindset. I think, it's very definitely very applicable to especially things like work environments and academia, classes and things like that, right? Just interpreting, um, a test per se as, well, if I failed this test, here's what I can do. Here's the strategies I can use to do better at this. I can talk to the instructor. I can take better notes. I can, read through the book more closely versus, oh, I failed this test. I'm just terrible at this class. There's nothing that I can do. I'm not going to put any more effort, things like that. And I also think that the growth mindset is important for, even things like test anxiety, um, where we are nervous that we're going to fail a test. And that oftentimes I feel like with test anxiety, we're worried that we're going to fail and that that's going to be an evaluation that we're just really bad at whatever this is, versus I think something that can get at decreasing test anxiety is realizing that, okay, even if I do badly on this, I can adopt new strategies to acquire new skills and do better in the future. Finally here, last slide. Again, I briefly mentioned that self-efficacy, control attributions have an influence on how much depressive affect we tend to have. And so we see that when we have low self-efficacy, but we still have goal commitment, so we won't leave this goal, right? We're still going to keep trying at whatever that is, but maybe we're not adopting new strategies. We're not putting more effort because we don't think it matters. We think our self-efficacy is just low. This is when we have the highest chance for depressive affect, versus, or those in this category would be at the most risk for depression, versus even those who have low self-efficacy but will disengage from a goal, or in other words, quit that goal, have less of a chance of feeling this depressive affect. And so this just kind of gets at showing that it's really just a balance of things where, you don't want to go around for everything you're bad at initially and be like, oh, I'm just bad at this, so I'm going to quit, right? But also, sometimes it might not be the worst thing to disengage from a goal. For an example, if I had a goal of being the best NBA player, like that's just not an attainable goal for me. So I'm going to consistently fail and fail and fail. And there's not much I can do to be the best NBA player. It's just not going to happen. So I'll probably gain some low self-efficacy for that task. And if I don't end up disengaging from that goal, I'll probably end up feeling pretty badly about failing over and over again. So that being said, it is really important to try and work on this high self-efficacy and having attributions that lead more towards the ability to gain control and have self-efficacy, and less so towards learned helplessness, right? But it is kind of a balance of multiple things here. It's definitely a complex matter. But that's it for attributions and control. Next, we'll be getting into goals.